Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Jeff Boehm, the CEO of the Marine Mammal Center. Headquartered in Sausalito, California, we're the world's largest marine mammal hospital. I'm delighted to have you join us here today for the second installment of our Ocean Policy webinar series. Our first installment featured Governor Jay Inslee and Congress members Karen Bass and Jared Huffman in a really lively discussion about the 2020 election and what that meant for climate change, for ocean policy, and from our point of view, for marine mammals. At the Marine Mammal Center, we know well the impact of climate change because we see it in our patients. And we also know well that solutions are going to come from many voices sitting around the proverbial table and cooperating. This webinar series brings together subject matter experts to talk about solutions that are needed for lasting change, for climate change, for ocean conservation, and for more. Today, we turn to experts in corporate sustainability to talk to us about capitalism and its role in driving this change. Moderating this series is Carol Costello. We're delighted to have her back, former host of CNN Newsroom, an award-winning journalist and one who has interviewed for presidents. Today, Carol teaches journalism at Loyola Marymount University and independently produces podcasts. A huge thank you to our panelists for joining us today to discuss how your corporations are addressing climate change and the changes you see ahead and the commitments that you see ahead. And if I could, an even bigger thank you to those of us who are joining this program. We so appreciate your interest, and I know that we're set for a really inspiring and motivating discussion. So with that, I want to turn it over to Carol. Carol, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you for the vital research the Marine Mammal Center is doing to save our oceans and the creatures who live in the water. We know your efforts will help save the planet. And now a little validation, right? I just came across this article this morning. The headline, "One Big Thing, Ocean Climate Solutions Are Having a Moment." And I went on to read the article, and it said a growing alliance of policymakers, activists, and conservationists are looking to the ocean for climate solutions. In fact, President Biden's top aides will gather today to talk about ocean climate solutions, which will become an important part of Biden's push to ease global warming. And this gives added importance to our conversation today. Climate change and capitalism, a critical intersection. It is a vital part of the conversation. Corporations, financial institutions can step up and make a difference, and some have. We all know we have a long way to go, but maybe we can get there faster together, environmentalists, corporate America, and government. So kudos to the Marine Mammal Center for hosting this important conversation, and kudos to our guests today who are having a difficult conversation. Not difficult because they're doing wonderful things, right? But we all know there's been some contentious feelings between environmentalists and corporate America. So thank you very much for talking with us, because we do think this is a vital conversation. With us now is Rich Brown. He is the Senior Vice President in the Global Environmental Group at Bank of America. Mr. Brown is responsible for environmental business development with a focus on transitioning to a low carbon energy future. Also joining us, Chelsea Scantlan. Chelsea Scantlan serves as the program officer on the sustainability team at Walmart, who leads the philanthropic sustainability investments related to ocean health and circularity for Walmart and the Walmart Foundation. In her role, Scantlan develops plans and strategies to shift business practices to become more regenerative. We also welcome Jordan Diamond. She serves as the executive director of UC Berkeley's Law Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment. Diamond also co-directs the Law and Sea Institute at Berkeley Law, which facilitates expert research and commentary on critical ocean issues. Thank you again for being here. We really appreciate it. And just a reminder to our audience, if you have questions, put them in the chat feature. We will get to them as soon as we can. And thank you for your questions in advance. But right now, I'd like each panelist to offer opening comments on what their organizations are doing for the planet. And we'll start with you, Rich.
Carol, thank you very much. And Jeff, thank you for creating this forum. I really appreciate the invitation to join this great panel. I'm especially pleased to be on the panel with my friend Jordan Diamond. with UC Berkeley Law's Center for Law, Energy, and Environment, otherwise known as CLE. Bank of America has a long-standing partnership with CLE that has helped identify key climate issues in California and identify policy and business investment solutions to these issues. CLE is always at the forefront on these issues, so it's great to have Jordan on this program today. Bank of America also has a long-standing relationship with the Marine Mammal Center. Our local market has supported the center financially, and many of our employees have volunteered, including current board member Brian Putler. In addition, we've joined the center as part of the Trash Free Seas Alliance. The Alliance is a group of businesses, NGOs, government agencies, and academic institutions working to identify the best ways to reduce the amount of marine debris going into our oceans and to address removing the plastic and other garbage that is already in the ocean, endangering marine and human ecosystems. Related to today's topic of climate change, Bank of America has made two recent announcements of note. In February, we announced a goal of net zero carbon emissions before 2050 across all of our business, including our lending and investment portfolios. What this means is we will work with our clients to ensure that they are on a path to net zero greenhouse gas emissions in their businesses. And just this month, we announced a new 10-year environmental finance goal of $1 trillion as part of a larger 1.5 trillion sustainable finance goal. That $1 trillion commitment advances an environmental transition across sectors to solutions including energy efficiency, renewable energy, sustainable transportation, resource efficiency, sustainable water and agriculture, as well as improved forestry and pollution control measures. I will note that we view 1 trillion as a floor, not a ceiling. And the good news in all of this is that we see opportunity for Bank of America and others to invest in climate action. There's a lot to do, but there's also a lot of capital being mobilized to address this monumental challenge. So I look forward to the rest of the program, and Carol, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Rich. Chelsea, you want to go next?
I would love to. Thank you for having me on this panel today. At Walmart and the Walmart Foundation, our strategies start with a shared value philosophy, which is the idea that we can create value by addressing societal issues through business. We also seek, in collaboration with others, to transform the underlying systems, for example, food supply chains, for long-term environmental, social, and economic sustainability. As a company, Walmart's focused on climate for a long time, but now understand the dire conditions, symbiotic relationship, and importance of nature for healthy communities, planetary survival, and surety of supply. Worldwide, we know that environmental losses are cascading. We see that animal populations have declined by over 60% in roughly the last 40 years. And so in September of last year, our CEO, Doug McMillon, challenged us to build on our existing sustainability work and to go even further by aiming to become a regenerative company, one that works to restore, renew, and replenish in addition to preserving our planet. And Walmart and the Walmart Foundation committed to help restore, protect, or manage at least 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean by 2030. I'm honored to work on the team that is now shaping and figuring out how do we achieve those bold aspirations and how are we going to measure progress against those targets. I look at the gaps in the systems today and what tools companies, nonprofits, and producers might need in order to move beyond business as usual and to adopt regenerative practices. To also start looking at landscape and seascape level responses and interventions instead of interventions at the individual fishery or vessel level. And I invest in nonprofits philanthropically to do work on system enablers to improve transparency and traceability in supply chains, to advance science, to help regulators know where to target, and to accelerate practice adoption. I'm excited for a robust discussion today, and thank you to the Marine Mammal Center for pulling this together.
Awesome. Thank you. Jordan.
Thank you, Carol. And it's a huge thanks to Jeff and Carol and everyone at the Marine Mammal Center for putting this on today. And I'm very, very happy to be part of this discussion. And thank you, Rich, for all this partnership that you provided over the past decade plus for our climate program. I obviously do not have a corporate sustainability program since I am at UC Berkeley. So my comments will be oriented a little bit differently. And that's more about the role, right, of capitalism or basically corporate action here. And from my perspective, it's a question of timing. So we've had the 10 warmest years on record have all occurred in the past, well, roughly 15 years, since 2005. We're projecting ice-free summers in the Arctic by 2035, if not sooner. That's 15 years from now. I have a 1-year-old. He's going to be in high school. It's not that far from now. And a decade ago, when I started working on Arctic issues, that number was projected to be 2050, maybe 2052, et cetera. And we've moved that timetable up. We're seeing climate impacts everywhere. Here in California, we're looking at the loss of snowpack and the reality that we're facing another dry year. Last fall, we woke up to the apocalyptic skies in the midst of the wildfires. And after weeks of being kept inside, my other son, my 3-year-old, knew to ask me before opening the door to the backyard whether the air was dirty or breathable. Right? That's not a question I wanted to teach my 3-year-old to ask. Coastal nations are grappling with sea level rise, with inundation, really thinking pragmatically about, okay, if we're going to be inundated and we're losing our land, do we maintain our territorial rights to the sea? These are questions we don't want people to be asking. Meanwhile, last year set a new annual record for billion-dollar disaster events. We were overturning, I think we had $22 billion disaster events. All but one of the years with 10 or more separate billion-dollar disaster events have occurred since 2008. So we obviously, if you're chiming into this panel, we all know this. So why am I emphasizing it? And it really is because of the timing. For the most part, we're no longer trying to convince the public about climate change and whether that's a problem and that's something we need to take action on. But we're working very hard to communicate about the urgency and the short time frame that we have for action. So even though we look at climate on decadal or century or millennia timescales, or I was a geology major, so we were looking at billions of years, right? We may look backward on those timescales, but we're talking in single to double-digit years that we have left to take action. So we've already seen 1 degree Celsius of warming, and we're projected to hit 1.5 somewhere between 2030 and 2050 or 2052. And when that happens is hugely important because the IPCC has told us that there's a significant difference between warming 1.5 versus 2 degrees. So we're speeding towards a critical milestone and we don't have a lot of time left to hit the brakes. So we don't have decades to take incremental steps or measured steps. We have years to slam on the brakes and do an about face. We ran out the window, quite frankly, on incremental change. So now it's, to steal Silicon Valley's buzzword, right? It's about finding the disruptors who can leverage the mammoth power of the private sector, of the investment sector, for climate good, for climate action. So that, I think, is the question that we have before us, is how do we switch from kind of the step-by-step approach to either the leaps or, again, kind of the about face. I don't think that we can do what we need to do through straight altruism or expectation that on an individual basis, we're going to choose to change our own footprints enough to address the scale of change needed. I wish we could, but I don't think we can. I think we need leadership from the private sector who can really turn chunks at a time. So that's what I think is really exciting. And that's the challenge that I think we have before us, is that we can no longer talk in a century timeframe. We can no longer talk in 50-year timeframes. We're starting to talk in 5, 10, 15-year timeframes.
Wow. Okay, I'm a little nervous now. Thank you, Jordan. I want to just focus on the leadership question that you brought up right now and ask you, Rich. You know, on your corporate website, Bank of America says, we recognize that climate change poses a significant risk to our business, our clients, and the world in which we live and work. Now, back in the day, that wouldn't have appeared on your website. That would have been radical. So what changed? What was the trigger?
Well, I think we actually have at Bank of America one of the longer standing environmental programs, particularly in the financial services industry. But what we realized two things. To have a sustainable economy, you need a sustainable environment. If we don't address climate change, there's going to be radical transformation, not just of the environment, but of our economy. So we need to address that. And we realized that early on, and it was back in 2007 when we created our first kind of comprehensive environmental program and commitment. And so it's really about building a sustainable economy and scaling up the solutions that can address climate change.
And Chelsea, before we get into all the wonderful things that Walmart is doing, you know, in detail, I want to focus on just that. You know, critics derisively call efforts by Walmart and Bank of America woke capitalism. Many CEOs call it good business. How would you describe it?
Yeah, I would describe it as good business and shared value. I don't think doing, you know, the right thing for business and adding and solving societal issues are mutually exclusive, and actually the ones that are working to solve societal issues and adding value through business, I think, are going to be the winners in the long run.
So Jordan, I'm sure you've heard the term woke capitalism, and you know, people use that term to try to stop these efforts on the behalf of corporate America. So will that tactic work?
Damn, sorry, mute button. I think, as with everything, this is okay. So I'm a lawyer by training, and every once in a while I sound like it, but I think it depends, right? So I think one of the challenges is that it's really easy, and I get this question a lot about essentially kind of, is any of this meaningful, right? And it depends. I've worked with Rich for years. Rich is the ideal funder. He is incredibly engaged, and he's really focused on impact, and he is completely hands-off in terms of trying to dictate or control what we do or what we focus on or what we're determining is, you know, really pivotal for action. And I have had other, you know, I've talked with other potential kind of industry or business funders who want to have more direct control, right? Where they are looking for the metrics that they can use on kind of the PR side, rather than the metrics that correlate to impact. So I think it depends on the actor. You have people who are kind of offsetting or doing it for the business good, for the greenwashing. And then you have people who are doing it because it makes good business sense, because employees care about it, because the writing's on the wall, and you might as well get credit for being an early adopter, right? There are a lot of reasons. And then there is the straight up, you have someone in a leadership position who can make the call and say, we should do this, because maybe their kid doesn't want to be breathing, you know, dirty air either, right? So there's a lot of reasons. And I think there's such a spectrum that if we don't get better at differentiating between that, we're really going to be kind of hamstringing ourselves. So we have to be able to differentiate between the people who are genuinely making a difference and the people who are straight up greenwashing.
Interesting. So Rich, a question for you. It seems like more Americans have lost faith in the government and in religious institutions, organized religious institutions, and they're turning towards CEOs to be sort of change agents, to be our moral leaders. And many CEOs are stepping up. Can CEOs really be all that in America? And should that be their responsibility?
Well, at Bank of America, our CEO talks constantly about responsible growth. And that's, I think, what we're focused on is how do you grow? How do you have a robust economy? And how do you have a healthy company that is lending and investing in ways that is good business for the company and for our shareholders, but is also addressing some of these great challenges of society, including climate change. And so there is a way to do both. And that's what we're focused on is looking at the, what are these big issues and how are they going to be addressed? Because if you look at issues like climate change, like even the pandemic and healthcare and a lot of these other issues, affordable housing, there is, you could take all the government funding in the world and all the philanthropy in the world, there still is not enough money to address these issues. And so the private sector and private capital has to be involved in financing the solutions. And there's a lot of great minds around what these solutions should be. And we view our role as working with those solutions that are out there and then trying to provide the capital so that we can get them out there. And then particularly as Jordan mentioned, with this sense of urgency so that we can scale them as quickly as possible.
So Chelsea, this is a question from one of our audience. This is from Cassidy. Do you get any kind of pushback, internal or external, against your corporate sustainability initiatives?
I think, obviously because of who we are, we get pushback left and right, but I think we do have the benefit of having a CEO that's like-minded and really was leading the charge on taking our ambitions even further. And I think he has set the tone from the top that's really made these conversations with our business easy. And so many of our business members and merchants are really excited about pushing these changes in the supply chain. I think one of the hard parts is that we were one of the first retailers, or actually the first retailer, to go out and say we're going to set a nature aspiration in this spatial way. And some of the pushback we got was, well, how are you going to measure that? And candidly, we want our nature targets to be set like our climate targets, which are science-based and credible, and we want our nature targets to similarly be credible and on sound science. But frankly, the measurement isn't all figured out for nature today. Some of it is, some of it we have kind of hypothesis about how to measure, and then some of it there's a lot of work to be done. And so we tried to strike the balance of how do we drive urgent action today and also set a framework that can be refined and can improve as we learn and as the science emerges. We know that as more and more companies come on this journey with us and NGOs and governments engage, that new ways of thinking about these targets and how to measure them will also emerge. And we also know that collaboration is key, and no one company, sector, or individual can do this alone. Some of the more traditional actions around environmental issues like certifications, segregated supply, and financial incentives are built to coordinate and scale individual action. And we think that's important and necessary work, and often it's a way to get suppliers or companies started on this journey. But for us to be transformational, we need landscape or seascape level action. And that's a new muscle and will require investment and working in new ways, such as setting shared resource management plans across government, the private sector, nonprofits, and communities, increasing capabilities and measurement and supporting coordination.
Jordan, just one more question on this topic. I think that, when I think about the position that CEOs are in today, because they're expected to be good corporate citizens, but their bottom line is still to make money and to please their shareholders, it's a difficult place to be. So are we just seeing like an evolving role for CEOs? Is this a trend? What is it? What are we seeing?
I think it's a great question. And I think, Richard alluded to this earlier. I think there's a need to increase basically the idea of what is, let's say, a healthy company, and what timelines we're looking at, and how holistically we're looking. So this kind of ties in, as Chelsea was just saying, we need to be looking more systemically at things. We're looking at larger scale change than we've ever looked at before. We're looking longer. It's not just about, your quarterly reports and, what's the ROI over the next 6 months, right? We have to be able to look over kind of the next 10, 20 years, and what sort of stranded assets are you looking at, et cetera. So there's all the difference in the way we need to actually look at it from the business side. And then there is the, it's like, are you actually able to look beyond the strict definition of fiduciary duty right now, as interpreted right now? And it's something we've looked at. And, can you change the definition of ESG? Can you better incorporate climate kind of more directly? Personally, I think that's the cleanest way is, can you actually build climate into the existing metrics that we have for corporate leadership, right? That's the shortest term, kind of most pragmatic way to do it. So can you build climate certainty? I'll give an example. In California, the insurance industry, there was a question of, if you're actually invested in coal, that's not a good long-term investment. And so there was actually a mandate from the California Insurance Commissioner that you basically needed to not be invested in coal. Now, that's just one small piece of it, but it is, it's a question of actually incorporating climate into kind of financial health. So that's I think the clearest and kind of short-term, easiest way to do it. I hope that long-term, there's a way to make that an expectation more broadly, that your role as leader is not just checking the boxes on fiduciary duty and, kind of the other checklist of SEC requirements, et cetera, but actually that more holistic approach to societal acting. And I think there are some people who approach that position that way now, and I think there are some people who don't.
Let's talk about that, because that's a question that came in from the audience, because you mentioned greenwashing in your opening remarks. What do you mean by that?
Greenwashing, I think if you are doing 99 ounces of harm and 1 ounce of good, then to splash the results of the 1 ounce of good is rather misleading, right? Or my favorite example is when I see things, you go to the grocery store and they're branded as natural. That's not an actual standard, right? That just means it exists and it may be ingredients, right? But it's not like saying organic, but it's meant to trigger implications of either organic or biodegradable or biodynamic or something, right? So those are the things that I think are quite dangerous, because you're depending on individual, either consumer will, or you're pulling on those strings of people who want to be doing better, but then you're not doing any better. So I think that greenwashing, trying to kind of jump on and kind of take advantage of the momentum for climate and environmental action, that I think is extremely damaging. But it's like, and I also think it's a disservice to those people who are making genuine efforts to change, right? You're taking that credit.
Right, and I know that that criticism is applied to most financial institutions and most corporations across America, especially by, environmentalists who are, just kind of learning about corporate America's efforts at sustainability, right? So, Chelsea, it's easy to criticize Walmart, right? Because it does have to meet its bottom line, but, just describe to us how sincere Walmart's efforts are in this area.
Yeah, so Walmart is serious about our efforts, and we look at it through a few lenses of how can we bring our suppliers along, recognizing this is a journey and that we are better suited trying to bring everyone along and giving them a starting place than setting a standard that's such a high bar that not everyone's going to be able to meet it right away. And so we want to set time-bound commitments of how to get our suppliers to be able to meet that. And, you know, in the seafood our environmental strategy for seafood has been around since the early 2000s. And, you know, we've continued to up our game on and to raise our level of ambition on our seafood sustainability. You know, in 2006, we set a seafood policy that was focused on certifying our wild caught seafood. And in 2016, we announced a goal to more sustainably source at least 20 key value chains by 2025, including seafood. In 2019, 98% of Walmart US and Sam's Club US fresh and frozen wild caught seafood was certified by MSC or in a fishery improvement project, proving that they are on track towards certification with time-bound, actionable, and ambitious goals. And so we've continued to progress, and then this last year set the goal of being regenerative and looking beyond certifications at that seascape level and that systems level of change. And this is something where we know we need everyone to come with us. And so we're thinking about how do we build out the tools similar to what we've done through our Project Gigaton initiative on climate to give suppliers an understanding of how do they start this journey, but for nature, and how do they go beyond, start off with certification in a fishery improvement project, get to certification, and then what are the projects they can engage in that are at that seascape level, noting that that seascape or landscape level is a new muscle and there are only a handful of projects out there today. And so we are looking at how do we also invest philanthropically to support those projects and go beyond just sourcing for certifications alone.
And Jordan, I suspect, you know, Walmart prides itself on offering affordable products for its customers. So balancing the two is difficult.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a huge question, right? And this is where a lot of the greenest or most climate-friendly actions also become unaffordable, right? And this goes back to the question of one of the biggest challenges we face is the hyperfragmentation of issues, right? So that's wonderful. Let's get a biodynamically, locally grown, you know, kind of product, and you know, it costs 3 times as much, and that's wonderful, quite frankly, for half the population in the Bay Area, which is totally, and you know, it's like the income levels here are totally out of sync with the rest of the country. But you know, it's like, then what are you doing from a societal level? And I think that's a real challenge. I think that that's something that it's one of the hardest things to differentiate when you see these large kind of initiatives, is trying to figure out which are the ones that are actually doing that trade-off analysis sincerely and which are using it as an excuse. Right? That's really hard. And that's really hard. It's one of the reasons, I mean, I don't say this to my kids because it doesn't, my kids think that, oh, look, mommy saves endangered species, right? Because that's how they understand anything to do with the environment, right? What mommy really focuses on is transparency, but that's not exciting to a toddler, right? But that transparency, if you can make that analysis available, and you know, it's like, it's a form of very challenging accountability, right? But if you can say, look, this is the most sustainable option, we're not choosing it because if we do, it's like then 60% of society can no longer afford this product, but we're working on replacing, right? If you can just show your work like it's fourth grade math, I think that's where we can really start to make progress. And that's when you start really being able to differentiate what is progress and what is honestly, it's like the lowest common denominator of what we can be doing. So I think that's, I think it's really important that we never talk about climate action or environmental action on its own, honestly. Like when you're talking about kind of a green solution, what's most sustainable, if it's not supporting society and the life for humans that we want to see, then is it really worth focusing on that as the focus of the conversation?
Okay, so Rich, Bank of America signed on for a major financial commitment to clean up ocean debris 17 years ago. We all want our oceans cleaner. You guys have been working to fund efforts to clean the oceans, but it's been a Herculean task. The village is struggling. Why is it still struggling so hard?
That's a big question. It's a big issue. But the length of our commitment, and we've done a lot of work with a group called the Ocean Conservancy. I think a lot of people may know them. They're the group that puts on the annual International Coastal Cleanup. And the International Coastal Cleanup is a good effort. It's a worldwide effort for people to go out to beaches and riverfronts and lakefronts and clean up the garbage that's there. But the real problem, we can clean up beaches till the end of time. What we really need is waste management infrastructure on land, particularly in those countries that have the greatest amount of plastic and other debris that generally gets into rivers, but ultimately ends up in the ocean. And so when you talk about ocean debris and marine debris, the solutions are really on the ocean, are on land. And the challenges are great because some of the countries that are the greatest producers of plastic that gets into the ocean are some of the poorest countries, and they simply don't have the resources to manage it, and so there needs to be a really kind of a collective effort to figure out how to do that. And there's a lot of work going on there. Another issue that gets into this is the value of plastic. If the value of plastic can go up, then recycling it becomes more economically feasible. But if in so many cases, the recycling isn't even cost effective, and so producing new virgin plastic continues to be the most cost effective option. So there needs to be work to try to, part of this is economics, and part of it is getting the right technology on the land so that we can begin the recycling in a much bigger way than we're doing it now.
And Chelsea, I just want to hone down on what Walmart's efforts in this area. So Walmart has this goal, as you might have mentioned, to manage or restore at least 1 million square miles of ocean in the next 9 years. Tell us what restoring 1 million square miles of oceans looks like.
Yeah, so I would say we're still figuring it out, but our commitment is to help protect, manage, or restore at least 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean by 2030. And we think about restoration as bringing an area that has been degraded back into production or into ecosystem service. So for a fishery that may look a little different than land and may look like restocking to restore that fishery. And we think about protection as setting aside or conservation, and then sustainable management as the adoption of practices or resource management plans that help balance both short and long-term needs and consider the intersections of social, environmental, and economic outcomes. We plan to work towards that goal by focusing on critical landscapes and seascapes that produce food and other consumer products in a few ways. So first, throughout product supply chains, we'll encourage adoption of regenerative practices across agriculture, fisheries, and forest management. We'll invest in and work with our suppliers to source from those place-based efforts that involves companies looking at landscape and seascape levels and collaborating with local governments, NGOs, and communities to help preserve those natural ecosystems and improve the lives of those who depend on them. These projects are somewhat new, as I mentioned before, but they do have the benefit of taking that more holistic, systemic seascape view rather than focusing on an individual fishery or vessel. And
So-
go ahead.
No, I mean, it just sounds, I mean, I know that both of your organizations have put so much thought into this. And I just want to throw this question to Jordan. So with all that these two entities are doing, it still seems that the problems are insurmountable.
Well, I hope not.
I
I really hope not. How about that? Let's remain hopeful. I mean, I think it takes more major actors. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think it takes everyone. Right now, the proportion of people or actors or companies who are taking meaningful action is still really small. And we need a much larger portion of the population to be engaged in this. Obviously, I mean, US and China, the two largest emitters of greenhouse gases, this is not a responsibility that falls equally around the world, but we need a much bigger percentage of people and actors to be engaged. I personally, as I said at the beginning, don't think that's going to happen purely voluntarily at the individual consumer level. And that's why we need the big corporate actors, or in the US, we consider corporates legal entities, legal individuals, they are a person. We need more of them to actually kind of join in with major initiatives. So I think the challenges are very hard. Part of the reason I work at UC Berkeley, so our center, it's a research center. In many ways, we operate as an NGO. I mean, we do policy research. But one of the reasons I'm at UC Berkeley is I really hope that one of the kids in one of our classes is going to come up with a solution, right? I hope they're going to have this brilliant transformative moment. I cross my fingers and pray for that kind of on a daily basis. But in case that doesn't happen for a while, right? We just, as I said at the beginning, we have a small window to take major action. So until that happens, or if it doesn't happen within that window, we need to find the levers to bluntly force change.
Okay, on that note, Rich, Bank of America recently announced an ambitious plan promising net zero emissions by 2050. I believe you mentioned that. So what does that require in terms of a transition of investments from oil and coal to clean energy?
Well, really what the 1 trillion does is it speaks to the potential here, and it's focused on this energy transition. So our commitment is to work with each of our clients on a transition plan so that they can get to net zero. And so by us setting the net zero goal, and we'll set interim targets along the way, but then it's working with each individual company or client to work with them to see if they can get on a path to net zero, and that's how we can we hope really bring a lot of the companies that are maybe in high emitting sectors right now, but there's a lot of technology, as Jordan said, there's a lot of technological advancement that's happening now. We expect there'll be a lot more, a lot of innovation. That's what our $1 trillion is going to help finance.
Jordan, the financial industry holds a lot of power in terms of investment priorities. While financial institutions like Bank of America are pouring trillions of dollars into environmental causes, and I'm speaking generally here, they are also funding the oil industry. A recent study done by a group of environmental organizations found that 60 of the world's largest commercial and investment banks have collectively put 3.8 trillion into fossil fuels from 2016 to 2020. So Jordan, critics ask, how can financial institutions meet any net zero goals when they're fully funding or partly funding the fossil fuel industry?
I mean, the goal is to stop funding the fossil fuel industry, right? So there is no version of the fossil fuel industry that coexists with, kind of a climate positive future. So we know that. And, I think one of the challenges that we're facing right now is a lot of oil and gas companies talking about transitioning their operations, but they're transitioning, yes, they're transitioning away from straight oil and gas as in selling oil and gas, but a lot of them are focusing on plastics, right? Plastics come from oil and gas, right? It is a derivative. Those come from the same fossil fuel companies. It's why it's such a big challenge. Plastics are so intimately tied to fossil fuel production generally, and then obviously have this terrible impact across our oceans and elsewhere. The plastic industry is a real challenge that we have to surmount. We've long known the issues with recycling, and Rich alluded to this earlier. So we absolutely need to slow the funnel of supports for the fossil fuel industry. It's that has to happen. No one expects it to happen overnight, I think, is probably the simplest way to put it. But hopefully that will kind of continue to be the trend. I will just also quickly note that, kind of the other types of support for that. So there are many different ways to try and trickle down the support. One being on the government side. We have long had a very mixed history with what we subsidize, especially in this country, and we do need to get that right. For far too long, we heavily subsidized these industries that we said we were then trying to kind of curb the emissions of, and I think there's a lot we can do to also get our government incentives and credits in better shape than they are.
So Chelsea, does the pressure come to change investments or the way corporations do business? Does it come from activists speaking loudly? I'm thinking of Greta Thunberg, right? Or young activists, like, literally screaming for change to help the planet. Does it come from there, or does it come from the bottom line and a shift in what consumers want?
I think it's both. And I also think it's disruption in surety of supply and just the recognition of science and seeing that production systems are changing and shifting, and there is a risk to future supply. And so it's also good for business to think about how are we sustainable long term and make sure that we have products to put on our shelf and to serve customers. And to that end, we are really focused on affordability because we know that so many of our consumers especially rely on low prices for food access. And I think Jordan's point earlier is important of, we need to think beyond just super high end options for how to be sustainable and think about what's good for the world and for all people and how do we get there together. And it is going to take everyone. And I think looking for those disruptors that still meet the impact and meet the needs, but are doing kind of true innovation. And what comes to mind is we're invested in Global Fishing Watch, and they developed a machine learning algorithm that can assign vessels a forced labor risk score based on behavioral indicators. And the grant that we just made to them is to pilot that model in practice, to identify vessels for inspection at ports, and to develop a roadmap for industry adoption. And so while we don't have all the tools and resources today to answer all the hard questions, we want to get there and are actively trying to create that pathway. I also think work that the Nature Conservancy is doing to scale electronic monitoring so that we have the traceability and transparency of where endangered species are being caught and bycatch mortality is visible, and so that we can start getting to solutions because we understand where is this really happening. So I think we need more of that, and we need others to come along and to adopt those things as they scale.
So along those lines, this question for you, Rich, and it comes from Lona, one of our viewers. She asks, these initiatives sound great, and I can see it being beneficial for North America and even Europe, but what about South America, China, and India? How do you influence change there? Can you?
Well, we're a global institution and we're doing business all over the world. And we're doing renewable energy deals in India, in China, in throughout the Asia Pacific region. And so that's, again, one of the ways that we have this impact is working with clients who are in those geographies and helping finance these kinds of projects. Again, that we need to see those scaled up. But in some of those countries, they're getting to do larger type wind deals and solar deals. And so we're working with them. There's a lot of work with international development agencies and like the World Bank and others. And we're working on, there's a term used called blended finance. But what it really is on some of these deals that are a little bit harder to do, you work at combining different sources of capital to fund a particular, whether it's a project or a company that is going to be taking on different renewable energy projects, as an example. And so you may have some higher risk investment capital, and then maybe some World Bank funding of some sort, and then you have some private capital, whether it's a loan from a financial institution or an investment fund of some sort. So you sometimes have to layer in these different levels of capital that have different risks, but you're seeing a lot more of that, and that is creating the incentive to get these projects done.
This is from Patricia, and it's for you, Chelsea. She asks, does Walmart have a specific plan to reduce single-use packaging?
Yeah, so Walmart has zero waste goals, and we within that are working to reduce our single-use packaging. We actually, as a tool that we're using ourselves, but we're rolling it out at no cost, free to all companies, because again, this is an area where we see the need for everybody to come along, is Plastic IQ. It will actually launch publicly on May 5th. And it will be plastiqiq.org, but it's a tool that helps you make and understand the trade-offs of different material packaging types, because many alternative options aren't the same cost or have different implications in terms of emissions, and the life cycle analysis doesn't make it actually a better alternative. That this tool really helps you understand what are the various implications and play with different strategies so that you can up your ambition, which, we are continuing down that path of getting to our zero waste goals and are making progress year over year and continuing to up the bar there. So
this question is from Cassidy, and it's for you, Jordan. How can we as a society replicate Walmart and Bank of America's desire to be part of solutions? What key part of the formula to having other large corporations care to be part of the solution?
Well, if it's a company that's not choosing to do it, right? If they're not providing leadership, then you have to push, right? And as individual consumers, it's very easy to, obviously, as one of over 300 million people just in the United States, it's hard to think of your individual consumer impact, but consumer impact is one of the only things that will actually change. So it is about having clear, concerted pushes to use kind of the power of the consumer to change that company's activity. I think what gets challenging is the conflicting information. So you get information that you should choose X from one person and Y from another, which means we put all this effort into consumer campaigns that ends up at odds with each other. So I think that's on an organizing side, that's a real challenge we face, is how to have campaigns that are simple enough that you can get the numbers that will actually effectuate change, that will actually push. Because I mean, it doesn't make good business sense to keep stocking a product that people won't buy, right? It doesn't make good business sense to keep stocking a product that, lights up Twitter every day, right? That's how you've seen airlines change their behavior because someone tweets a, picture of an unfair practice, or, et cetera. So it's really about doing that, but it has to be in large enough numbers that impact is felt. But so I never underestimate the power of consumers, of kind of individuals, but we have to work on collective action.
And with that, that brings us an end to our session. Thank you all very much for being here. It's so interesting. And thanks to all of you who are watching. There will be a recording of this on the website, and be sure to sign up for future webinars because we plan many more fascinating, interesting conversations. I'll throw it back to you, Jeff.
Actually, Carol, would it be okay as Jeff's coming back? Oh, sorry. Would it be all right if I just mentioned one thing? I just would love to take a note, especially since we have kind of mentioned the oil and gas industry. Today is the 11th anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, which 11 years ago today, 81 days, over 200 million gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf. And speaking of the challenges of marine restoration, as Chelsea was discussing earlier, the damage that was felt to the communities, to the ecosystem, et cetera. I just want to take a second just to honor that was felt.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Jeff.
Yeah, Jordan, great point, and a legacy of impact that lives on in the scientific community, those of us studying marine mammals in that environment. Very, very sobering reminder. Thank you. And thank you, Carol, phenomenal facilitation of what is a really tough array of discussions. And thank you to our panelists, Rich Brown, Senior Vice President, Global Environment Group, Bank of America, Jordan Diamond, Executive Director, Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment at UC Berkeley Law, and Chelsea Scantlan, Program Officer, Sustainability at Walmart.org. Really appreciate the three of you joining us here for discussion. I was scribbling throughout and capturing a lot of the points, and I want to share a smattering the idea that Jordan, on your part of that window, it has been closing for some time. Let's pay attention, right? The idea of woke capitalism versus good business, and the fact that all depends on the leadership and the sincerity of that leadership. And I'm starting to see and starting to support and starting to encourage CEOs as change agents. Love the idea of nature aspiration and restoring 1 million miles of coastline, right? Phenomenal stuff. And the idea of looking, Chelsea, as you had said, at your supply chains with kind of an unflinching look at what the implications are. Carol, you struck me when you heard the opening remarks and you said that you were frightened. And I was asked just recently in a discussion like this, am I optimistic? And we're on the front lines. We see phenomenal wildlife coming into our hospital impacted by actions we have all taken. So it's never far from our minds. And there's so much stuff that could lead one towards pessimism, but it's just not a choice, right? It's not a choice. We've got to be optimistic. We've got to see the solutions. We've got to be open to pushing one another towards those solutions. And Jordan, to your words, hopefully nurturing those who are going to come after us and hopefully with us, if it's soon enough, to affect those changes. So in closing, I just want to thank all of the participants again who have joined us from home, and make sure that you know that you have a role in what you do as consumers, in who you reach out to in corporate America, in who you elect into your local offices, your school boards, and federal offices. We're all players in this. If you want to learn more specifically about what you can do around climate change, please go to Marine Mammal Center /climate, and you'll find some tips there. And I hope that you follow our work and continue to do so. With that, thank you for all you each bring to this discussion. Thank you for your dedication to the issues, and we'll close this session. Thank you.